betray my age with this here. My father was in the Union movement, and he was a Democrat. But he was more conservative socially than a lot of the Republicans that he negotiated with, who were Republican.
Right.
And so my question is, whatever happened to liberal Republicans, people who are pro-management, pro-free enterprise, but liberal on social issues, and people like my father, who was very strongly pro-union, extremely but very conservative man in other areas. Whatever happened to those groups, and if they would come back, would that not take care of some of the problems that you're elucidating today?
You raise a really good question, and ironically enough, I was talking about this with some folks in the reception, and the answer to that question is, the parties are right now allowing for a pretty good bit of diversity on economic issues within the party, but not much diversity at all on social issues. So I believe there's one pro-life Democrat left in the House. So the bipartisan pro-life caucus, which used to be fairly large. There was a pretty large number of pro-choice Republicans and pro-life Republicans, and a pretty large number of pro-life Democrats and pro-choice Democrats, is now down to one. So it's bipartisan because of one dude. And so the constitutional lawyers used to think of when you hear the words abortion distortion, that was a phrase that meant something in the First Amendment, that many courts were punishing anti-abortion speech in a way that they would punish no other kind of speech. And it was a phenomenon called the abortion distortion. That's been largely removed, but we now have what you would say an abortion distortion in American politics, that almost all other political differences are less important for party identification in many ways than that one. And then that's also part of the negative polarization. So a person can say, well, look, I know person X is, I don't know, let's take a totally random example from a state that rhymes with Alabama. Look, I know this guy whose name sounds a lot like Roy Moore has received a lot of really substantiated complaints of terrible misconduct with teenagers when he was a 30-something-year-old man, and he doesn't believe the Constitution protects Muslims, and on and on and on, but he's pro-life. And then therefore, then you're going to support him. And so that kind of division that's occurred it's very real, it absolutely exists, and I don't see it changing anytime soon. Yes, sir?
I'm a fan of George Orwell. And I think we're in the latter days of his novel, where 2 and 2 equals 5. That the truth of things like there are two sexes. We're changing our language to absolutely meanings that nobody could understand. And we're also having people who can be offended because we can't guess what they want to be called to be. How do we stand up against that?
Well, so there's two things going on here. One is we have real big and important arguments about the sexual revolution going on. No question about that. Whether it's abortion, whether it's gender identity, whether it's sexual orientation, we have really, really important arguments going on in those areas. Let's have the argument. Let's have the argument. The problem that I have is when people attempt to short-circuit the argument by saying, I will not only refuse to hear your perspective, I will seek to have it silenced in the marketplace of ideas. And that's what we're often seeing is that I will refuse, not just refuse to hear you, which, you're right, nobody had to come here. Nobody has to stay here. But there's a difference between I refuse to hear you, which is a problem for your own openness, with I will try to make sure you're silenced. And that's where we're going to have some of those folks on the other side, I'm conservative, who are on the left side of the aisle, stand up to some of the folks on their own side who are saying we need to make sure that we hear no other argument and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. I might be with you on your arguments about gender identity. I might be with you in your arguments about abortion, but I'm not with you in your argument that we censor. And what I have found is that one side is really bad at policing the other side. So the right can sit up and say all day long, don't do that, stop, stop, stop. And what we'll tend to do is only rally our own side. And the left can go to the right. Stop, you're being hypocritical, and they're only going to rally their side. If we're going to have any real movement on stopping this, you have to have people from within each camp saying to their fellow ideological travelers, no. No. And in fact, one of the ways, the first wave of political correctness, there's been multiple waves of political correctness in the U.S. In the early 90s, when I was at Harvard, was one wave. And this was the shout down and the screams and all of that. It went away. Why did it largely go away? It wasn't because Harvard got taken over by conservatives. Trust me on that. It's because a lot of people on the left at Harvard said, nah, no. This is a little-known fact, especially amongst my fellow conservatives. Elena Kagan, now Justice Kagan, became Dean of Harvard Law School. And what did Elena Kagan do? She hired conservative faculty. She even hired gasp evangelical conservative faculty. She went to Federalist Society meetings and even was said, I love the Federalist Society. That's Elena Kagan. That's leadership from the left at the law school that increased tolerance at that law school. That's how it's done. One of the most promising movements in the United States of America is a movement called Heterodox Academy. And these are thousands of mainly left-leaning professors and administrators who are standing up and saying, we need more and different viewpoints in the academy. Thousands. Now, there's thousands more who disagree with them, but that's how it has to happen. And those of us who are on one side of the aisle, when we see it on the other side, need to jump in with both feet and say, I stand with this person. You may disagree with me on A, B, C, D, and F, but man, we can circle our wagons around free speech and civil liberties. And we have to be able to do that. Yes, sir?
Thank you for coming, and I'm really enjoying this. But I've got a question about the mega churches now.
Mega churches?
Yeah.
Okay.
And back in, I grew up in the late 60s and 70s, and we had Billy Graham, Reverend Ike, and Elijah Muhammad, and I had like 7 Jewish roommates, and I took the best of whatever they said, and that's not happening anymore. So can we ever get back to that?
You know, it's interesting. We have a lot of political polarization in this country, but a lot of religious polarization, which is its own and different kind of problem, very much related to political. If you look at a map of the United States of America, every state that classifies itself as most church, that not classifies itself, that is most church-going, is a red state. Every state that is least church-going is a blue state. So we're beginning to see this religious divide, which is alarming. It's not always been like that. But hidden within this religious divide is this really interesting fact. And I'm not sure how it's going to play out over time, but here's a really interesting fact. The 2 most church-going communities in the United States of America, aside from Mormons, they lead everybody. We all know it, okay? You make us feel bad all the time. But the 2 most church-going communities besides Mormons are white evangelical Protestants and black Democrats. Black Democrats and white evangelical Protestants go to church at about the same rate. I believe, it depends on which survey you look at to see which one does more. Now the interesting thing is, the most secular group of Americans demographically are white liberals, white progressives. So in the Democratic coalition, you have the most secular and the most religious group. It's an interesting dynamic. And so I don't know how that is going to play out. One of the reasons why there is that difference that exists, that white evangelicals are in one party and black Democrats are another, is because of a whole lot of historic reasons, and a whole lot of historic reasons centered around race, particularly race in the South. That takes a lot to get over. And nobody has figured out that path exactly. But there is this really interesting reality. And it will be interesting over the next 20 to 50 years of American life to see how that works out. Yeah, I was here then, I'll go here, and then back to you.
Are you in favor of eliminating the NBA salary cap, and why? And Sonny Bunch is always right.
Am I in favor of eliminating the NBA salary cap, and why? Okay, this is where the libertarians in the room will stone me. But no, I am not, even though that's a restriction on the free market. Because, and this is where the homerism in me comes out, I'm a Memphis Grizzlies fan, and we would just get swamped. So my principles stop at the hardwood. Whatever's good for my team is the best for the league.
I'm going to play a little bit of the devil's advocate here, just to help me with my own thinking on the limits of free speech.
Sure.
So I just wrote it out here. What are the reasonable limits of free speech, and what principles should be the working guide? Is inciting a riot or violence the only guide? I'm thinking in particular of a case where a woman sent text to her boyfriend encouraging him to commit suicide, in which he subsequently did so. Would you agree that she did not have the right to incite harm, even if it is self-harm? And if so, isn't the reason inciting violence should be illegal because it is wrong? And if so, what degree of wrongs should we allow in free speech? In other words, is there a right to some wrongs? If so, on what basis do we decide some wrongs are too grotesque to have a right to? For example, doesn't picketing fallen soldiers' funerals meet a level of grotesque wrong that we might not have a right to?
Great question. And yeah, the answer to that question is, it gives me a great opportunity to do a super fast primer on constitutional law so that you guys are now going to be a real head at parties. Because you're going to know more about the historical background of the freedom of speech than anybody else you know. So what's interesting about the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, which is what our legal doctrine around free speech is centered around, and where our culture of free speech is centered around, is the First Amendment protects something called the freedom of speech. It doesn't say freedom of speech, it says the freedom of speech. So therefore, you're talking about a specific body of rights, not a limitless body of rights. And the way the courts have understood the freedom of speech over the years has created a balance between speech and some competing harms. So you raise one, incitement to violence. And usually in incitement, we have to be really careful about what we mean when we say incitement. Incitement to violence is not advocating violence. I can advocate violence right now. I can say that the next person who argues that Patrick Mahomes is not the greatest quarterback in the NFL should be hit with a crowbar. And that's totally fine. But what I cannot do is say to, let's see, we got Jacob here. Jacob, it just said that. He said it. He'd rather have Baker Mayfield. Everyone pull out your crowbars, hit him now. That's incitement. That would be something to be reasonably designed. It would be reasonably create imminent harm. So am I creating imminent harm? A threat, a true threat, your money or your life. That is not protected. The common law has carved out some other long-standing exceptions. Consumer fraud, even if I'm using free speech, is not protected. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, which was issue at the soldiers' funerals, is not protected, but is narrowly defined. And under the facts of that case, that was not deemed to be intentional infliction of emotional distress. So I can go through these categories that are usually, what you can usually do, the commonality of them, is that I can tie the words that I use to a specific, concrete, legally recognized harm. I've been defrauded. I've been relieved of my wallet. I have the mob's about to burn down the courthouse. That there is a defined harm to my legally protected interests. Now, what has ended up happening is a lot of people have said, well, wait a minute. So therefore, there are limits on free speech, and if speech cannot harm some of my other legally protected interests, so I have a right to be free of defamation. You cannot intentionally lie about me, even though I'm a public figure, if that harms me. I need to tell that to Twitter. So what a lot of people have said is, if there are these traditional doctrines that protect me from speech that harms specific legally protected interests, well, then that means that free speech is not unlimited and all bets are off. No. These are very carefully cabined off exceptions. But what people have tried to do is try to bring subjective emotional injury into the equation. And they say, if I feel hurt, then that should be a legally cognizable injury. But once you go down that road, it's over. Because once you start to introduce this concept of subjective feeling of harm, then the chilling effect descends. So I'm going to pick on Jacob again. Jacob and Elias. So Elias here took the right of Jacob. Is tough as nails. I mean, look at him. He's tough as nails. I can say whatever I want to Elias, and it doesn't bother him. He's fine. I can make fun of any aspect of him. He's fine. He doesn't care. He gets as good as he gets. He is not a snowflake. He is made of flint. And so if we're at a college campus under the old speech code regimes, the problem was if I had a conversation with Elias and I said, man, that's what college is all about, is having that rough and tumble give and take like we just had. Oh, there's Jacob. He's down the hall in my dorm. We'll have it out too. And say, I start to talk to Jacob, but Jacob's a snowflake. I mean, look at him. He's a snowflake. No, you're not. I know you're not. But anyway, so I say the same words I said to Elias, but I said to Jacob, and they hurt Jacob's feelings. Under the college speech code construct, I just broke the law. Not because of the words that I said, but because of the way they were received. And whenever you begin to condition free speech on listener reception, that my words are legal or not legal based on how they make the audience feel, you've lost free speech. Because you never know how the audience is going to feel. And a law-abiding person is going to step way back to not offend anyone. And that's the heart of the speech code regime, and that's why it got struck down time and time again. But that was a great question. Yes, sir.
You made reference to the NFL player and the Google
Yes.
employee. I don't believe the general public understands the difference between a state actor and a private employer.
Right.
So if you'd address that.
Yeah, so the First Amendment only protects me against this government. If the Shonie Institute is sick of the way I'm talking right now, they could yank me off the stage immediately, and I might tweet about it, but I can't sue about it. It only protects me from the government. But what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a culture of free speech, a culture of free speech cannot thrive when the only people who are protecting speech, or the only entity protecting the speech is the government, and it's doing it because it has to by law. A culture of free speech can't thrive when powerful cultural institutions are enforcing conformity. And so the argument for Google was not the First Amendment keeps you from firing James Damore, it's that you are a multinational corporation based in the United States that employs people from every walk of life. If you guys don't value speech and disagreement and dissent and some degree of give and take, that's a big, powerful, negative cultural argument. The NFL, you guys are the Google of sports. You're the biggest. You're the most powerful. The NFL, a lot of people don't realize this. It's arguably the last thing on television that everybody in America, every significant demographic in America still watches. Red and blue alike. Every race, every creed, we still watch the NFL. It's not true with college football. It's largely a red rural sport. It's not true of NBA basketball, which is largely a blue urban sport. It's not even as true with baseball, which is much more sort of a suburban sport now. The NFL is one of the last big, truly cross-cultural institutions left in the United States. And to say, honestly, we'd really rather you be open to disagreement than closed is a way of protecting a culture of free speech. And what I always get nervous about, I'm always nervous when somebody says, yeah, I protect free speech, but I found out a way to censor you, and I'm going to do it. That's when I'm getting nervous. And a lot of conservatives would say, well, that's not a First Amendment issue. Even the fact that the President of the United States, a government official, urged the NFL to fire these players, he didn't violate their First Amendment rights. He sort of violated the spirit of Barnett, not the letter of the law. So they say, because he can do it, it's fine. Because the NFL can do it, it's fine. Because Google can do it, it's fine. No, I can say, no, it's not fine. But that doesn't necessarily mean I want a law overriding the NFL and Google and making them comply with the First Amendment. I'm saying, I want you to voluntarily choose to embrace free speech. That's the core argument to the United States of America right now. I want you guys to voluntarily choose to embrace free speech, to embrace disagreement, to embrace dissent, and to even embrace maybe dissenters. That might be a bridge too far for some people. Yes?
All right, thank you, Mr. French, for being here. I'm going to kind of piggyback off the previous comment, which is actually basically what I was going to ask you. So,
Yeah.
aside from just voluntarily accepting free speech, which probably most people in this room, I would say most decent people agree with that, you know. Aside from that, what do you think people should do? We have, like, you know, to me it seems the biggest danger of free speech is currently private companies.
Yeah.
You know, talk about the NFL, getting rid, you know, maybe clamp down on Kaepernick, Google firing James Damore. I also think about just censoring people on social media in general, which is happening, in my opinion, happens a lot more to conservatives than people on the left. On the one hand, I'm very sympathetic to the idea, you know, these are private companies, they're their own businesses, they can do what they want. In general, I don't like the idea of government telling people what to do, but at a certain point, don't you think that social media companies like Facebook, Twitter, Google have such cultural power, arguably more power than many governments in the world? Don't you think that we should maybe do something to protect internet freedom, to protect people's right to free speech, even if, you know, it's not the government infringing on their right, but it's, and I kind of have like one more thing. In the same vein, you know, you're saying one of the things we should do to combat this is to be courageous, you know, to stand up against this mob culture that tries to shout people down, get people fired from their jobs, get, you know, that money taken away from that kid, you know, who raised lunch. So to me, it seems that the danger to free speech isn't so much the mob culture as it is the financial interests who are supporting that. You know, people would stand up for free speech if they thought they weren't going to lose their job or their livelihood and everything was going to go
Well, I
down
mean,
with it.
I use the term courage for a reason.
Yeah.
I'm not saying stand up for free speech only if it's completely, totally easy and there's no risk to you at all. This is blood-bought freedom that you should risk nothing at all for. I mean, that you know, I get a lot of this when I speak around the country, and people will say to me, but this could happen to me. What do we think courage means? You know, it means, okay, I might get some blowback here. I'm going to say, and I'm not saying be a jerk about it, be a troll about it, with calm conviction, to stand up in the face of the urge to censor. And we often really exaggerate the challenges we face. I'll give you a great example. I was speaking on this very same topic, and a guy came up to me afterwards, and he said, you have no idea. My company is like East Germany. And I said, you mean they will take you out of your home in the middle of the night and shoot you and dump your body in a ditch? Well, no. Well, then it's not East Germany. We keep saying things like this. We keep catastrophizing our political structure and the risks that we face. And so one of the things that's self-reinforcing is when everyone hangs back, it gives the powers of censorship a feeling of greater power and authority than they have. And I've been in the room where I'm the only conservative, and something is going down that is not good. And I say, you know, I literally said these words once in an admissions committee at a law school when I served in the admissions committee. They're about to exclude a guy from admission to the campus because he was an outspoken Christian. And I said, you know, my resume makes this guy's look like a pagan. And I'm here in the committee, in the room, and you guys are discriminating on the basis of faith. And, you know, I kind of made a joke about it like that. Bam! The whole room shifted. No, we're letting him in. Sometimes you just got to take even the tiniest little risk.
Right, but how exactly do you do that and still maintain movement? You know, I mean, if you're going to lose your entire job, you have 4 kids to feed, you know, there's an incentive to, you may ideologically want to do that,
but
it's good.
Lots of people,
you know what I mean? Like, it's
lots of people say that to me. Lots of people say that to me. Lots of people say that to me, and I've been in situations with myself in corporate America, and I question the reality of that. I question the reality that if you calmly say, I disagree with his perspective, that you're going to be immediately terminated.
What about James Damore? That's what he did.
Yeah,
That's the
you-
example you brought up.
One guy. Okay, so what we do is what we say is we like take that one guy. There are many people at Google who agree with James Damore. They have 15 of them, right? So does Google fire 100 people?
I think they would.
Does Google? Well, there's no evidence of that. So again, what we keep going back to, this is an interesting phenomenon. I have been accused, some of you follow interconservative debates, of not appropriately agreeing that what we are engaged in right now is war, is ideological war. But then when I say, no, it's not ideological war, and what we actually really need is for some people to stand up for themselves and for others, you say, but wait a minute, that might have some risk. I've never heard of a war won where we don't ask for some bravery from the foot soldiers. Like, never in my life. So what is it? Is it so serious that it's war for the Constitution of the United States of America is hanging in the balance that, no, America, you don't have to risk anything for this and shouldn't be asked to? That doesn't make any sense to me at all. None at all. Especially when, if just a couple more people stand up. I've been around college campus fights so many times, and here's what happens. Time and time again, a student will stand up on their own and they face a ton of incoming, and I will know for a fact that they have allies all over that campus. And the allies will not stand up. They will not. They won't say a word. Not a word. And I've said to them again and again, why not stand up? Do you not realize that there's this old proverb that joy shared is double joy, grief shared is half grief. Stress and incoming and criticism that is shared is diffused. It just is. If there's 2 faculty members, it's a lot different than 1. If it's 3 faculty members, it's a lot different than 1. If there's 15 faculty members, it's a lot different than 1. But what happens is they'll look at the 1 and say, nope, I don't want a piece of that. Now, the thing about the social media companies, here's the problem. What is the government rule that does not put the government in the process of deciding what shall and shall not be put into permitted on social media? So for example, let's look at Josh Hawley has a bill that says that large social media companies, and the interesting way he defined it, very vaguely defined, so that it might even include like Fortnite for the number of users that it has, or dating sites, many others that they're going to have an audit to show that they're viewpoint neutral before they can receive protections of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Who will decide if they're viewpoint neutral? A government commission. Okay? Are we as in favor of that if President Trump is appointing the government commission as we would be if President Elizabeth Warren is appointing the government commission? That raises an issue with me. And then it says you have to be viewpoint neutral in purpose and effect. What? So does that mean that if the conservatives get really good at making things go viral, more so than liberals, you got to throttle back the conservatives and ramp up the liberals so that everybody goes viral equivalently? And a lot of this is also based on a high degree of paranoia. If I were going to give you, just show of hands, do you think that on an average month, the BBC and the New York Times get more Facebook engagement than Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire? Now, if you say the BBC and the New York Times on any given month, you're likely wrong. Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire gets more engagement on Facebook than the New York Times and BBC. 2 of the biggest, most powerful media companies in the whole world. And Ben Shapiro's like eating their Cheerios. And so we have a lot of paranoia about this. There have been some individual incidents that I don't like, but a lot of paranoia. And I do not like legislation based on paranoia. Yes, sir.
I would follow up on the theme of the last question in terms of the question of solution and maybe strategy, and in asking you the question of whether part of our problem of this really split binary kind of reactionary politics might be solved somewhere in independent political proactive thinking and strategy, somewhere in the radical middle of America, both in place and in heart. But I would be remiss, given the topic of your speech, if I didn't quickly point out that if one were hypothetically to be in a boat on First Amendment choppy waters, along with a librarian after being arrested for controversial political speech at a Q&A at a public library, there would be no better professional class, I might say, than people like librarians from the public affairs, the AV.
He's talking about the fact that he went to jail along with our librarian Steve Wolford is over here. You're asking a question here in this public library of Dennis Ross, our Middle East ambassador.
So you...
It was hypothetical.
It sounded awfully specific for hypothetical. Your question about the radical middle is really interesting. Look, I am under no illusions that we're going to punch through the negative polarization of 120 million, 130 million voting Americans anytime soon. But what we can do is empower. It actually doesn't take that many people to raise a dissenting voice to alter the conversation. It really doesn't. It has consistently surprised me. I have seen universities change policies without filing a lawsuit. Without filing a lawsuit because two people in a room of 12 or in a committee of 12 said, we should rethink this. We should rethink this. One of the central stories of American democracy is the power of the lone voice, or the power of the small group. I mean, think about the civil rights movement. Think about what started in Montgomery, Alabama with one person saying, no, I'm not going to move to the back of the bus, and then supported by a few more, and then supported by a few more, and then supported by a few more. And what I really get leery of is the notion that unless I'm part of the big tribe, the red tribe or the blue tribe, that I'm part of the powerless tribe. And what I have found is I think that when you're willing to, even if you're going to vote red or you're going to vote blue, that you're going to, when the time comes and when the time is right, say no to that tribalization. You're actually often among the most powerful people in the room. That's a great American tradition. It's a great American tradition, and we need to encourage that. But always the tribe is trying to pull you back in and say, if you break from us, you weaken us. If you break from us, you're going to increase the chances that we're going to lose to this horrible, awful voice, or the horrible, awful opposition. And you mentioned the term, the radical middle. I don't even think it's necessarily a middle thing anymore. I think it's is your mind independent or not? Because I've never called myself a moderate. I mean, if you went down my political positions, y'all, I ain't moderate. But I hope and I pray and I try to be independent-minded.
But the moderate is not the middle. I guess just the idea of the radical middle is that everything in between the extremes, ultimately, but willing to go deep and holding the extremes at some level too.
Right. No, I understand.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Dude, we've got maybe two more questions,
Okay.
and I apologize to the folks in line.
Okay, so kudos to Crosby for mentioning Claire's tweet about you, and I would say that is exactly what you're a proponent of, is Claire McCaskill tweeting good things about you, and so it looks like Missouri made a mistake in the last election. But anyway, so I wanted to go back to your example, the Iowa kid example, and so this might give you a pang, and I would like for you to assert your intellectual capital and ponder this and then get back to me on it.
Okay.
But it seems to me that example demonstrates, so journalism is about getting the scoop in a different way now. It's about money. and Anheuser-Busch pulling back was about money. And so it seems to me that that's a problem with capitalism.
Well, I would say this, they did it so quickly.
And somebody agrees with me.
I know. They did it so quickly, there wasn't even an opportunity for the market to work. And the interesting thing is the market has then said some interesting things about this, that actually the Venmo contributions to this kid have blown through the roof as a result of this controversy. People have been angry that Anheuser-Busch did what it did. And so they, for a short period of time, they have surged his donations. And the other thing is, look, I'm not a person who says that whatever a player in the marketplace does is the right thing because they did it in the marketplace. Like, I have critiqued Facebook's speech policies or Twitter's speech policies. But to say I disagree with those speech policies is not the same thing as saying I therefore think there should be a law. And so the fact that a player in the market makes a choice in the market that I don't like, I'm not going to stand back and say, well, it was the market. I'm going to say, no, that was wrong, and here's why it was wrong. And I think that's important for us to do as citizens. But yeah, one of the interesting aspects that we've seen is people will move so quickly to cancel.
In both ways, though.
Oh yeah, they will move so quickly. I'll give you a great example. Down in the University of Alabama, there was an African American administrator, no complaints about his performance on the job, none. They found some tweets, some conservative journalists found some tweets from before he was employed at Alabama about Black Lives Matter and some pretty strong words towards police, and bam, he's gone. But there were no complaints about his work performance. And so what conservatives have to do, if we're willing to say, why are we doing this old tweet thing about people we like? Why don't we say, why are we doing this old tweet thing about somebody we disagree with? Because then it just becomes the war of tit for tat, fight fire with fire, and the only world in which fighting fire with fire works is like in the real world of fighting fire with fire. In the internet, the only thing that you get is more fire. And that's where we are right now. Yes?
Two things. One, I'm doing a specific hour, so I need you to sign something for me. And two, yeah, judge me, I know. And the guy over there, I don't know his name, he said you were in the military and you had a Bronze Star. I was wondering what you did to get that Bronze Star. It's intriguing.
Yeah, so I was with the 2nd Squadron, 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, and in the military, there's two kinds of Bronze Stars. The Bronze Star for Valor, which is a Bronze Star for a discrete, valorous event under fire. And the other one is a Bronze Star for Meritorious Service, which is your commander essentially looking back at your combat deployment and saying, your service over the course of that deployment was worthy of a Bronze Star. I got a Bronze Star for Meritorious Service, which was reflecting back on all my service. I did not receive a BSMV where I could sit there and say to you, we were taking fire and I put my body in front of. So I'm very proud of it, but I want to be very clear of what it was.
Yeah, so like if you just come after, you can decide this one.
Come up to me afterwards.
I'll come up to you, I'll go to you.
Okay.
I can answer that next question too.
My question, I've been following along the great French Sohrab, can't say his name right.
Amari, Sohrab Ahmari, yeah.
The great Sohrab Ahmari debate. My question is just the importance from your point of view from civility, even within our own side, and then instead of the need to destroy, crush the other side, rather persuasion, and the importance of that within our current climate.
Great question. So the importance of civility. So I have a theological imperative to civility. As a Christian, I'm commanded to love my enemies. I'm commanded, and look guys, I'm a flawed person. You could probably search through the last decade of Twitter for me and you'll be like, I don't think you got it there, and you'd be right. But I try. I'm commanded to love my enemies. I'm commanded to respond to attacks with kindness. I'm commanded these things. These are not tactics for me. So it's not like I can sit there and say, well, I'm gonna be nice, and unless haven't owned enough libs lately, and now I've got to change the tactics. No, this is the baseline where I have to be, okay? And I'm glad of it, because I'd hate to think of the person I would be if I indulged the worst parts of myself. But a lot of people are not Christians, so what's the argument for civility and decency if you're not a Christian and you're not under this command? I think it's a really pretty simple. I mean, it's pretty pragmatically simple. Number one is, let's just be honest. Do we want to live in a world? Do we want to live in that world where we feel, and our opponents equivalently feel, completely free to denigrate and destroy and insult me if they disagree with me? Is that the world we want to live in? And the other thing is, why do we do what we do? Like, I want to persuade people. I want more people to come to agree with my perspective. That's why I will get up and speak. I was a litigator for a really long time. And one of the things that I always thought, everything I wrote, everything I said, my opposing counsel was not persuadable. They were hired to oppose me. I'm not trying to win them over, okay? Their client was unpersuadable. They're the one who hired opposing counsel to come against me. I'm not going to win them over. But I've got a judge and I've got a jury who are watching everything I do. So even if I'm talking to opposing counsel, I'm wanting the jury to hear and see my demeanor and my approach. If I'm talking to opposing counsel, I want the judge to hear and see. And how do you win people over? How do you win people over? Is it by being the biggest jerk in the room? Well, you better be a really charismatic jerk. I mean, in the WWE, some of the heels can do it. Like The Undertaker was a pretty charismatic bad guy. But I'm not that charismatic. How do you win people over? You win people over, and typically, not just by being more reasonable with the competing ideas, but also being the kind of person they would want to join. You're the kind of, if you're a part of this movement, I want to be part of this movement, because we make decisions here, and we make decisions here. And if I'm a condescending jerk, I might kind of sort of connect here, but if I don't connect here at all, no, I don't want anything to do with you. But right now, through negative polarization, we're in a position where we often don't even think about persuading at all. Instead, we think entirely about mobilizing our side. And one of the ways that you mobilize is by whipping up frenzy, is by whipping up anger. And so that's one of the problems that we face. People have given up on persuasion in favor of mobilization, and often mobilization is inconsistent with persuasion. All right, that's it. Thank you all for listening.